we're going to get into this and see what kind of trouble we get into now. So enough of me talking here. Of course, Dorman Training Center, air brake primer with a purpose. We know all about that. We don't care about me. You know, I'm here no matter what happens. Doesn't matter what I do. And if you look at the subjects to be covered, reasons for having air brake system, overview viewers. And again, please, in 1 hour, I cannot do everything that's required of an air brake system too. But if you pick up some stuff, that's even greater, you know. But I am going to real fast, I totally forgot. Let me put that on. So if you guys have your phones with the cameras and stuff, this is the first one-day one we're going to try, okay? It'll be Friday, October 31st, and it'll be at the Dorman Products Proving Ground Garage, you know, and that's on 3400 East Walnut. You know, and again, if you're in the tri-state area, I guess maybe the tri-state area, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey stuff, it really isn't that much of a drive, to be honest with you, because I get a lot of, when I do my classes here, I get guys coming from all over the place. You know, they'll drive 4 or 5 hours to get to the classes. And speaking of, we just got a email from one of the guys when G and I did, so I'll get myself back on. So, you know, got an email from somebody in, I can't even remember, Doreen, wherever it was, but they came through an AC class and they're looking for electrical stuff. So all that stuff, keep in mind. I guess I'm retelling everybody again, we're willing to travel. G and I are passionate about what we're doing, and if you've ever noticed the PowerPoints I put together, they're more of a real world. I don't like to kind of look all fancy new stuff, because I'm one of those firm believers all day long. When we work on something, it ain't new. It's going to be hard. You guys bust your hands and everything else to get these components out. You know, so I don't want to stand there. Look how nice this is. Look how nice this sensor is. You know, yeah, go ahead, pull that sensor out of the hub or, you know, bracket and everything. You're gonna bust. Well, again, I gotta watch my language here, but you know, so let's get into this. Thank you, guys. All right, question a day. Why do we seem to have problems? After all, there's nothing complicated about our goals, and that's to save lives and properties. Okay. And I usually do that. I add on other stuff. You know, I call these my responsibility slides. Okay. And I start out with a technician. After all, that's us guys. And, you know, what's our responsibility? Perform his or her duties within the laws, regulations governing commercial motor vehicles. Regardless of whether or not there are specific laws governing repairs, technician is always liable for damage or injuries resulting from repairs performed in an unprofessional or unworkmanlike manner. You know, considering lives and property depend on good repairs, there's only one acceptable goal. And I'll be very honest with you guys, when I do my 2-day brake classes, I also have the same slide responsibility for drivers, for managers, and for law enforcement. You know, everybody's got to do their job. But then I do discuss some issues like communication and all that stuff and everything else. Pre-trips with drivers, again, I'm not trying to pick on them, but, you know, if you've heard my stuff before, when you've heard my stuff before, you know how I feel about driver pre-trips. And this is not a put down on drivers, but, you know, I tell everybody that how the hell can you teach a driver how to do a proper pre-trip if nobody takes them by the hand and shows them what bad looks like from good? And I mean, I'm on the roadside with the enforcement guys. I get thousands of pictures, tens of thousands of videos, pictures. And let me tell you, nothing seems to change. But again, for you guys that are watching here, I always say, who's the best guys to actually show drivers how to do a pre-trip? That's you guys out there. You know, you guys can take the driver by hand and say, listen, next time you see this is bad. Because if, again, not to put the drivers down, I guess. But again, just put yourselves in their shoes. How would you know what bad looks like if nobody's ever showed you, you know? And that's one of the weaknesses of our industry. So now, considering lives of property depend on good repairs, there's only one acceptable goal: to restore and maintain the vehicle systems and their components so they perform to original specs. Really, that's what we're there for. Okay? And if we fail at it, you know, unfortunately, it could result in an accident, injury, and so on and so on. So, food for thought. Okay, 80% of issues we encounter are man-made. Why? I don't even want to spend too much time on this slide, but come on, guys. You're the guys on the front trenches. How many times have you gone something, or vehicles come into your shop, or you're working on something? It's like, oh, somebody just worked at it. You know, somebody just did. You know, for years we've called it a cinch shoe. So yes, parts break down, things go wrong, and like I said, you know, even with brakes, you know how many times somebody changed the ABS sensor, it comes back a week later, and geez, you didn't latch it correctly, or you didn't zip tie it, you know, where it's rubbing through, and that's just simple stuff. So again, I'm not going to spend much time on it, but keep that in mind. 80% of issues are man-made, you know. This is why you're looking at enforcement over here, you know, you're looking at me under creepers and stuff. To be honest with you, if you have a fleet, this is one of the biggest fears that the fleets have out there. You know, they're trying to reduce, they're trying to keep their violations, their CSA scores as low as possible. And I'll be very honest with you, they're hurting right now, because insurance companies are definitely taking advantage of it. And, you know, I know in my state, you know, so many of the insurance companies don't even want to write trucking companies. And if they do, they'll use the scores or your safety standards to kind of like, let's put those prices up. Well, how freaking high can we go, you know, before it's like, you know, we get into a bust situation. But again, that keeps me busy with the live hands-on training. It really does. So, which, you know, 2020, you know what? I never add. This is the same every year. It's in your handout. I just trying to make an impact here, you know, that I just got through with that slide with the roadside inspections, and explains itself, you know, how many inspections and so on a year. So it's a huge thing. Now, I'm going to get myself out of the picture here so you can see the thing. I highlighted, so we don't go through the whole thing, you know. I highlighted brakes. Every year, it's the same for every year. The top violations, you see brakes out of adjustment. Okay, next slide, 393.53 brakes, all others, you know, anything you can think of going wrong with it, you know, commercial motor vehicle manufacturer after 1019 has to have automatic brake adjustment. However, it's not working, you know. So usually on the roadside, if you have a brake adjustment, you're going to get this auto-populated that, you know, why is the brake out adjustment? Only makes sense. Automatic slack adjuster is not working. And again, brake hoses, tubing, shaping, you know, and I do, you know, all sorts of stuff. I get calls on that. How can I eliminate some of this stuff? And you can see it here, brakes out adjustment, number of defective brakes. So usually when I do my regulation stuff, I'll go very intensely into this, and, you know, slow it down, walk through it. What can we do? You know, what are the consequences? So, you know, now this came in for an annual inspection from a fleet with a shop, safety people. Look at the angle of the push rod on this newly installed chamber. See, my thing is, remember that slide with that, since you worked on it, man-made? You know, a lot of this stuff should be common sense, but, you know, I have to, and you guys realize it more than anybody else, we're getting shorthanded. Nobody wants to do this stuff. So you're putting these young people on there. You don't have time to train them properly. And, you know, the existing techs in the shop, they got to hustle their ass off to keep everything going. Now, all of a sudden, you're asking them to follow a new guy around. And this is why things go wrong, you know. So, you know, but again, I told you the responsibility slides I have up there, you know, it's us guys, it's the drivers, it's the management and so on. And my point with this slide, you know, if you're the safety person, owner, manager, would you be able to find this yourself? and more so explain this and train your people how to find it. And that's the weakness in our company. You know, we have a communication problem, but yet everybody in that food chain needs to be comfortable with all the regulations and everything that pertain to it, you know. So now this is the same vehicle but the other side. Now it's in the right hole. And again, it's the little things. We don't know what we don't know. So this is why I place value on the trainings we do, you know. And like I said, I'm happy to see you guys here watching this. You guys are the cream of the crop, and you know, most of you, this is, for you guys, is probably a refresher, but hopefully there's new guys there too watching this too, even though this isn't a full-blown brake class. So, but again, appreciate that. I gotta keep saying it over and over. This is another inspection. What do you see? You know, if you look over here, if I can get my thing going over here, look at that push rod bent over here. Yeah. Not only that, there's my second pin missing. The slack adjuster is not gonna adjust, you know. And again, I'm being a wise ass, and when I do live classes, you'll hear me talking about, I can't talk the way I do, you know, on these things here. So now, periodic inspections. These are regulations that you go backwards, and I've done lunch and learns on nothing but regulations, you know, holding the books up and everything else. But in that 396.17, and it goes all the way 396.23, you know, it tells you, you know, it has to pass an inspection annually. That's a safety card, you know. So basically, you know, once a year, if you got a commercial motor vehicle, you're going to have to do an annual inspection, you know. And to be honest with you, I put it in red. Really, it's the motor carrier that has possession of the vehicle is basically responsible for that inspection, you know. Now, every commercial motor vehicle must be inspected as required by this section. And I'm alluding to Appendix A. It's in the back. I've brought that up so many times in the previous one. If you've never gone into that section, or if you do inspections and you truly are wondering, what am I supposed to do? What are the minimum requirements? You get a hold of one of these books, you know. Shit, I got it here. I'll do it one more time. Let me switch over to here. You get a hold of one of these books, safety regulations. I have the pocket books, you know. This is I got the new one, 2024. Not much changes. I got shitload of these I use for the trainings, but everything you want to know about the vehicles, what you got to do is in here, okay? And basically the sections that you want to concern yourself is part 393, parts accessories, and of course the one I just quoted on slides, 396, you know. So something a lot of guys don't realize, in that 396, there's a 396.25 provides the qualification requirements for anyone inspecting, repairing, service, and maintaining brakes. Call it a brake inspector, okay? And that's an employee of a motor carrier that is responsible that all task-related brakes meet applicable safety standards. All right? So they're similar to if you have to get qualified for annual inspection, you know, but the qualification for brake service inspection is kind of specific to brakes, you know. Inspector qualification, so basically if you go in that book, it'll spell it all out, you know. Here's an example, I plucked it out. Understand inspection criteria set forth in part 393, mentioned Appendix A. Knowledgeable and has master methods, procedures, tools, equipment, and so on. Capable of performing inspection by reason of experience in one of the following: successfully completed state or federal training, or has a certificate from a state Canadian province which qualifies perform commercial inspection. I gotta see if I had something else. And the other thing too is, I didn't have room on the slide, is again, if you go through a manufacturer school, or like I do the trainings over here, you know, the brake trainings and stuff, you you can get it certified. So, and this is something where Dorman is heading. We're going to head towards that, so go out there and be able to provide that kind of a service. So and to be honest with you, I'll be totally honest with you, I tell everybody, if you show someplace on file, you got a hands-on year of experience, believe it or not, that qualifies for it. But you can't beat training to go along with it, And don't take it for granted. I know so many companies that have had fatalities or something goes wrong, and the DOT comes in and they go to audit. They'll audit the drivers and hours of service, all that stuff and everything else. But they'll also want to look at your files, and one of the things they'll always look at, hey, who's doing your brake work? Who's doing your annual inspections? Can I see, are they qualified? And consequently, I do get a lot of calls. It's like, hey, I hear you do that stuff and everything. So, but again, it's one of those areas that, you don't think about until something happens. So again, if there's safety people, managers, and so on, this slide just is a good slide. What do you see here? Can you explain it? Would a driver know how this chamber works? Would anybody in your organization know how it works? We all know it's round. There's a couple hoses to it, but that's not enough. So again. Interconnected system, brake system specified in paragraph of the section interconnect anyway. They must be designed, constructed, maintained so that upon failure. So let me see what the next slide is. Okay, and real fast, do me a favor, zoom in on this board, and usually that slide right there, I walk everybody through how the brake system works, draining the tanks and everything else. And I actually show everybody how, this meets all the requirements of being a dual air brake system. I got one-way check valves here. There's a two-way check valves here. And that's what I like about doing the live stuff. I mean, I have fun. I'll screw around with everybody on this thing. I'll kick air tanks and, just to prove a point. So, but anyway, that's where this slide comes in. Even my brake board basically is, it can go up and down the road. Then we got the automatic annual inspections back in 2006, automatic slack adjusters, they came into that, any brake found to be adjustment. So basically, if you, again, let's go back, with that one slide about annual inspections and so on, So this is part of the regulations for years. If you're the person doing annual inspections, including myself, vehicle would come in for an annual inspection. If the brake was out of adjustment, you get your wrench, you adjust it up, put your sticker, name on it, whatever every state does, or you do in your own fleet, and you let it rip. Well, you can't do that anymore. If there is an issue if it's out of adjustment, you need to figure out what's going on with it. And again, it's not one of those like they hired thousands of automatic slack adjuster cops following us around. That's not the way the system works. But you can visualize, if that vehicle gets pulled over, you got a brand new sticker, and that sticker represents your name on it, basically, and all of a sudden the brakes are out of adjustment. I mean, it opens up a kind of like okay, this just got an inspection, what's going on over here? And that's how they catch a lot of this stuff, So, went to the next one. So, this requires to look at possibly the whole system, other components, because again, it could be the slack adjuster, but it could be cams, could be bushings. There's so many variables in here. Now, one of the things that changed our world was the stopping distance rule. Okay, and what happened was one of the issues we have is that if a truck gets involved in not necessarily involved in an accident per se, that it's the fault of the truck or driver, but it just happens to be at the wrong place, wrong time. And to avoid something, this truck driver steps on the brake, slams on it. Stopping distance just isn't there for the trucks, So consequently, they done quite a bit to change that rule, and basically wound up doing a 30% reduction. Anything comes off the assembly line. And on your slides, you'll see over here, these are the phases and so on, that they went through, and by 2013, pretty near anything that's going up and down the road, they're down to that 30% reduction compared to the old ones, But, so to meet these stopping distances, and by the way, I know I went fast, but in your handout, you'll see up there picture standard drum, high performance, front air disc, rear air disc brakes around. And that slide basically tells you, and nothing you guys don't know, that when a vehicle comes into your shop, okay, you're going to see any kind of a system underneath there. So to meet this distance, distance mandate, many manufacturers went from 15 to 16.5-inch brakes on steer. And I usually do a lot with this, with the inertia dictates mass in motion. And, I always in my classes tell how suspensions become part of the brake systems, and I actually prove it out. But just to keep it in a little 1-hour lunch and learn, that means suspension, steering, other structural requirements had to be considered and addressed by the manufacturers. And basically it's to absorb an increase, and again I said the transfer of load, mass in motion tends to be in motion, all the laws and physics pertaining to inertia and so on. So quite often implementing changes to drive axle brakes to maintain overall brake balance. This is the caveat here. I'm not quite sure if I understand this, because I'm kind of dumb sometimes trying to wrap things in my head. But NHTSA stopping, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, stopping distance rule is meant for manufacturers to satisfy, which rightfully so, okay? It's going to have to come off the assembly line. Rule, you saw it in the slides, doesn't require a specific method used to meet the requirements. So Mr. Manufacturer, put on whatever it meets, just meet the requirements. Okay? However, this rule doesn't include any requirements for motor carriers to maintain the brake performance capabilities on the new vehicle once in service. So this is a part I'm trying to wrap around my brain. You're bringing up these regulations, these requirements and stuff, and I'm all for it all day long. Boy, that stopping distance is a killer. No pun meant with that, But then after fashion, you don't give a shit, So again, But I'm here to tell you, because I do get involved with fatalities and I do some investigation, so I'm going to forewarn everybody what happens if there's a liability issue and a decreased performance is discovered. What if I go backwards and say, well, wait a minute, what about, hey, who worked on it last and so on? I'm looking hard in the slack adjuster area. Make sure you know if it is stroke or clearance sensing. Don't get mixed up and condemn. Yep, you're right. Those are the things, I cover. Good point, in case I forget. So back in the day with manual slack adjusters, because really technically the slack adjusters are they are the heart of the system. They really connect your pneumatic portion of it to your mechanical portion. Okay, they're the connection between your brake chamber and then your shoes and so on. And yeah, you get the cam and so on. But what led us to these automatic adjusters? Back in the day, they looked at, did some studies, and they looked at vehicles with manual slack adjusters, and you can see the percentages there. We're talking adjustment over here. 26% were found to be two inches or more, 13% to a quarter. And then they looked at vehicles that, because automatic slack adjusters were coming out before the mandate. And you can see over here the reduction of actual, brake adjustments. So they looked at the data, and here it is. Anything after those years, that month, it's got to have an automatic slack adjuster on it, and don't change it. This is the simple version that was on for years. And the reason we went to automatic slack adjusters, just think about this. The linings, every time they get hit against the shoe, that it's rolling, you're going to generate friction, you're going to have lining reduction, and so on and so on. And you're limited to how far the push rod can go out. Usually my classes, I'll show it with the chamber in my hand and everything, you know. So, well, you know, screw it. In case, just a little reminder, let me get it here. Don't worry, I'll bring it up over here. You know, a lot of guys don't realize this, you know. And when I tell them the first time, by the way, if you wonder how much, you know, we gotta have a lot of force. This little spring you see in here, back here, okay, if I want to go down the road, I use air in here, and I actually squeeze this, you know, to that. Look at the spring. Those of you that have had babies and kids and stuff, didn't you ever go in these parks where you have a little horse on top of here and the kid rocks back and forth on it? That's a lot of hefty spring here. But my point being is, if you look over on this end over here, you see this housing? Okay. There's a push plate in here. So when you step on the brake, this push rod comes out, and this push plate will hit this housing. If the shoes haven't hit the drum yet, everything's academic. You could have 1,000, 1,000,000 pounds of air jump up and down with your 2 feet. Okay? This will actually stop this going from any farther. And this is why brake adjustment is so important on these vehicles. You know, what the hell was I talking about now? I had a thought in my mind, you know. But yeah, so, oh yeah. Well, the old manual slack adjusters required you to actually manually go down there and bring the shoes closer to the drum. That's what you were basically doing. Well, if we weren't doing it, and you know, maybe the slack adjuster would, worm gear would freeze, all sorts of issues. So we wound up having a lot of breaks out of adjustment. So that's why they came up, hey, put those automatic slack adjusters on, you know, which is great up to a certain point, you know, but just because they're automatics, they're still gonna have some issues, okay? And Harley had it over there, you know, in the chat, okay? Yes, there are different types: clearance sensing, stroke sensing. Stroke sensing adjuster will adjust the slack when since the set stroke is exceeded. Clearance sensing adjuster will adjust. So it's kind of nice to know what slack adjusters are what. And the biggest important reason is, say for example you pull a Rockwell off, okay, or Meritor or something, you know, and then you're going to go to a parts store, you don't have the right one in hand. There is no law that says you can't put a Haldex on or a gunite, you know, but however, right there, if you're going to change the slack adjuster, you know, say you can't get the Meritor, if you're going to change the slack adjuster, you need to make sure you're doing both sides. But even more so, the way you set up these slack adjusters is huge, okay? So you got to make sure you get the right clevises and so on, you know, and it's called RTFI, you know. So, and that's where we see some problems out there, you know, somebody did that. It's like, oh, you know, who did that? So, yeah. So, good point, Harley. And again, automatic slack adjuster, I'm just trying to show you guys, I love cutting stuff apart, so I really understand it. I guess I'm not the brightest bulb in the world, but sometimes that's my way of understanding how something works. But you can see here, there's a lot of components in here, you know, clutch assemblies, worm shafts, much more so than you had the previous manual slack adjusters. So, you know, and these are just examples. I'm not going to go through every one of them, do this, do that. They all have their weaknesses, you know. But the truth of the matter is, let me see where I'm going. Okay, have ability back off. I'm going to back off. While we're at it, remember those previous manual slack adjusters? So what happened was, I'll keep it stupidly simple. We were very, kind of, how should I put it, you know, kind of ingrained. You do something over and over all the time, it sticks into your mind. Subconsciously, that's what you do. So when these vehicles came in with a manual slack adjuster, so for example, if you're doing a service or PM, you didn't care. You just went underneath it. It became automatically, you go underneath there, get your 9/16 wrench, push the collar in, you know, tighten the slack adjuster to make the shoes go against the drum, then you pack off your quarter, half, whatever everybody was comfortable with, you know, and you let it rip. So now, when these automatic slack adjusters came about, we carried that over, okay? So these slack adjusters would come in and, you know, we'd tighten it up and everything else. And as good as we thought the automatic slack adjusters was, we actually were kind of responsible for maybe destroying them. I mean, you guys know, I don't have to tell you guys, when you back off some of this, like the Haldex, you go, and then you got a lot of force to pull it back. I'm not an engineer, but something tells me in my mind, this can't be good for the slack. I'm just using that as an example. And it wasn't. So we had to do a mindset, a change of the way we do things. And it was hard getting the message out, you know, and it still happens, is that when you get an automatic slack adjuster, don't back it off. Have somebody step on the brake, because if you step on the brake and the push rod stroke is where it's supposed to be, that tells you the automatic slack adjuster is working. If you go and touch that automatic slack adjuster first before you even check the push rod, how do you know it's working or not? You know, because our job is to catch these things. So that, I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, we can go more and more into this. So, you know, yeah, after my, yeah, I see that, Harley. And again, it's kind of like, it's not, the problem is, you saw the edge codes portion. I do a lot with the edge codes. Don't ever hang your head on the edge code. Edge code basically tells you the coefficient of friction, and that's not the way. If you guys are looking at Harley, that's why I appreciate Harley being on all the time. What happens is, with the edge code, okay, it just gets you into a ballpark. It's a nice way of knowing I'm over here, I'm over there. But if you think about the linings, what they put into these linings, I mean, it's like a witch's brew. I mean, I tell you, it's cashew nuts. Throughout the years, they've done everything. So a good lining, you want your wear from it, first of all. It's a heat machine. All these different linings, regardless what the edge code is, it all depends, you know, you're going to get wear due to heat. Your coefficient of friction is going to change. The better lining maintains that edge code that you hardly had over there, okay? But a poor lining, all of a sudden the coefficient of friction will drop. Then it'll come up. And again, I do that with friction materials in my class. So the biggest criteria that if you ever look at linings is, you know, definitely all day long, look for something that says the axle weight rating. That to me is bigger than anything else. And then I'm never afraid to compare linings, you know, to see who does what. But what you also want to look for is see if any of these manufacturers put their lining through a SAE kind of a test. And it's a very rigorous test. If it passes that, I mean, really passes this test, it does, I mean, everything. You can put the SAE standard, you know, right on that box over there. And I like to look at that. And those who work with light vehicles, you see it quite often. You see the markings there. Don't cut the clamp if applicable for the maxi spring. Oh, that, let me tell you, I got videos of, man, that is a lot of power, you know. That's when I do it on the board, okay, when I do it on the board, I walk through how a chamber actually works and stuff, and I'll show you how, you know, for example, if you pull the park button, and basically that's what happens with that spring brake too, you let it rip, you got about anywhere from 1,800 to 2,000 pounds of force, and I've done classes where guys have had to actually go and get some reconstruction on their jaw and stuff. Good reminder, you know. And again, that torque resistance with the Haldex, you're right, you know, with that, it's meant to be there. So if you back up that Haldex slack, for example, and you don't get that, remember I was saying, if you don't get that, you know, scrap it. That slack is gone. You know, it's history. So, you know. I just so you know, I try to watch the chat box, but I can't always because I get so involved with the slides. So if I miss something, you know, I truly apologize, you know. So now, some slack adjustability back off. Never take it for granted. Brakes will always be adjustment. Many factors can or could result in an auto slack adjuster not capable of maintaining. Improper installation, worn cam bushings, bent or binding push rods, inadequate, you know, so on and so on. So automatic slack adjuster ages, you know, again, it's like me, guys, you know, things don't work the way they should once in a while. But however, that's why periodic brake adjustment check is required, you know. That was a funny, guys, you know. My parts do work, just so you know. Oops. Now I screwed up. Okay, let's get back to this. Now think about this. Slack adjuster that over adjust can cause the brakes to drag. This can cause brakes to overheat during severe braking, usually at downgrade. That can cause drums to expand to a larger diameter. Guess what? Prolonged condition can lead to longer push rod. It's a vicious cycle. So it's possible for a slack adjuster to interpret this as need to adjust the brake stroke, take up the slack. However, when that drum cools, returns to normal diameter, what are you going to have again? Like I said, it's a vicious cycle. We have brake drag again, you know, so, you know.
So let's see if we can take a look at the issue we
little bit of video.
With this combination chamber and brand new slack adjuster.
If you can't hear it,
and you're going to have to
can you guys hear that?
Because
I think every time I put a video on, I have a little, that you guys can't hear,
this side, it's
but I can't hear it. So
all the way into the chamber. And
in case you're missing it, you know, basically we're going to step on the brake, and you can see on top over there, you're going to have a little bit of a binding over there.
So Brian had to
basically, what happens is, I thought the brake was supposed to come on.
Everything seemed to be awful tight. The pins were tight into the clip.
What happens is, this is a perfect example about using the right clevis, okay? Because we look over here, it has to be the right clevis. It has to be fine-tuned. It has to go in there. And in this particular case, somebody did a, you know, let me use an older clevis, and all of a sudden, this is not lining up. They have to be together to get good adjustment. So,
go for it.
Remember the thing about brakes out of adjustment? So this particular vehicle, guy could come in with all brand new whatever, right? Shoes on and everything else. And if it comes in for an annual inspection and it's out of adjustment, I could feasible, and I've done that. I've told the guy, he says, I can't put a sticker on. Well, I just put new discs on, I put new shoes on, new drums on, stuff. But dude, you should have changed the cams and cam bushing. So that's all I'm trying to say, how sometimes the regulations work hand in hand. Vehicle out of service, service chamber. I'm not going to spend too much time on there, okay, because we're watching the clock too. You know, walk you through a little bit, but those service chambers, not the spring ones, okay, they'll have the square ports, but a lot of these will have these trapezoidal tags on it. And again, if you're not comfortable with, you know, what those mean and everything, be careful, okay? Don't assume just because it says rated stroke, this is my adjustment stroke, because hopefully I got it in here. So for example, this is a regular clamp type chamber. If you notice down here on the type 30, type 30, this is your most typical chamber that you're going to have here. On a standard chamber, it's 2 inches. Let me stop right here too, okay? Let me stop right here. Every book you go into, the manufacturer books go tell you, you know, adjust your brakes to the readjustment, CVSA readjustment limit. And I'm telling you, bullshit, okay? You do not. Your technicians, why would you be happy with 2 inches? Remember that previous slide? The guy's going to come down the road and everything. The drum is going to expand, and now it gets pulled over. Where do you think that brake push rod stroke is going to be? It's going to be over 2 inches, right? Okay? We're technicians, okay? What we do is we strive to bring that gap closer. If you could get an inch, inch and a half, stay away mentally from that 2 inches. Don't be happy with that. You know, I had to mention that, you know. So, let me go back. But anyway, now I flipped the slide. Now we're into the long stroke. If you look over here, and this is a perfect example. So say you have a Type 24. The tag might say 2.5 inch rated stroke. Where's my adjustment limit, right? But you follow what I'm saying, okay? I'm gonna switch myself back. That's why in my shop, I make sure that we have posted on there what the brake stroke should be. You know, I don't care if it's a type, you know, long stroke, whatever the rate it says, this is it. This is the law. That's the requirement, what you just saw in the previous slide. So make sure you go by what you're required to have. Rotors, drums, they're huge. Okay, I do a lot of stuff with the rotors. Of course, this is hydraulic brake one because I just happen to have that with that crack there. And all I got to tell you guys is, inspection-wise, again, just think about it. Oh, how can you miss that? Very easy. What if this crack was where, guys? Okay, right behind the caliper, you know. And then when it gets pulled over, guess where the crack is? You know, rotors are very, very, very hard call, I'll tell you right now. Drum is the same way. You know, somebody's got to say, how can you miss this? I can miss it, guys. I can miss it. This crack is way up on top. There's a dust shield over there. You know, I'm the first one to admit it, you know. But when I see this, and I do know they do crack, okay, I kind of like, this is that kick myself in the ass so I don't get too complacent. To once in a while try to keep stuff like that in my mind, that, you know, the potential's there. Do just a little bit of a better job on it, because, you know, and if any of you have looked at my regulations, if you look at my regulations stuff I've done, I've never been happy about this, you know, rejected if upon brake application a crack opens up. Really? Are you freaking kidding me? You better tell me there's a severe crack, even if it hasn't opened up yet. I don't want it on my vehicle. So, you know, brake adjustments, made up several measurements, free stroke, then applied stroke with, you know, absolutely, you know. Just so you know, okay, when you're doing the adjustment on the ground, okay, you want a little bit of free stroke, because you don't want this thing going out there and dragging, and we're back to one slide with the dragging. So I always, you know, whenever possible, you want to make sure that you do your, you know, possible to do your adjustment off the ground, just like you would do your drum brakes. And actually, you know, the free stroke, to be honest with you, and I show guys, is not really, that should not be your hang up, because I can ask 100 guys out there, and I usually do when I do a class, we've got 15 people, I'm going to have somebody tell me, you know, how do you adjust the brakes? And, you know, I'll have one guy going, gee, I tighten it up, then I back a quarter turn. Somebody else says I back it up a half turn. Somebody says, oh, on this type of automatic slack adjuster 20 and stuff, which is okay. Do not hang your hat on that, because my tightening could be tighter than yours. I could be using a longer wrench than you, and so on. So the whole idea is that you get free stroke, whatever you're happy. And that's why I hang my hat. Ultimately, you better have somebody step on that brake, because ultimately it's that application measurement that is the key to it. The free stroke will allow you, give you a little bit of wiggle room. Hey, I'm getting close to 2 inches. I got some pretty decent free stroke, so I can nudge it up a little, so you play your games. But walk away with this, no matter who's watching here. if you have free stroke and say this is your standard, you know, not your long stroke, type 30, 2.5 for the long stroke, but let's say, you know, for the argument's sake, this is standard 2-inch. And if it keeps, you know, goes up exceeding that 2 inches, and no matter what you do, stop. Don't let that vehicle out, okay? Just something is wrong. And I can get into about burnishing and stuff. So like I said, this is more of a kind of like, you know, do you need this brake course and all? So again, perfect example, cracked drum. And you don't want this road debris out there. Temperature, it's a heat machine. I'm looking at clock and I'm starting to panic here, guys. So I'm gonna really start buzzing through this stuff real fast. When I do my classes, I actually show it's a heat machine, heat machine, heat machine. So why not use that to your advantage, okay? I've had this fluke for years, and of course I got my regular gun, I'll show you in a minute. I'm taking temperatures, 558, here's 311, here's a 207, okay, 222. All I'm trying to tell you is it's a heat machine, so use the value of it being a heat machine to do your diagnostics. You know, do I use it all the time? No, but once in a while something will come up, and I walk everybody through it. And basically when you saw the 500, okay, that's way too much. Because usually if I take a vehicle down the road over here, you know, I'll make some brake applications, my baseline, and that's the key to it, winds up being someplace around 200 degrees or so. So again, in my classes I get into each wheel has to do its share work and so on. Like I said, I can't do a whole brake course here. So now, following major components, this, you know, balance, distance air must travel, tubing size, fittings, valves, chambers. I'll do a little bit here. And if I was doing my brake class, I'd actually walk everybody through it. You know, the distance that air has to travel is huge because you have empty spaces in these lines. So when you step on that foot brake, especially on top, that control line, it's empty. So the vehicle's still traveling, the air has to reach it. And again, take my word for it, you know, we have issues. And then I also show, you know, in my brake class how manufacturers have overcome with this. But you also have, for example, that relay valve that you see over there. Some have crack pressure, some don't, and so on. So I walk through the whole thing of why you're seeing what you're doing and so on, you know. So, you know, this simple service brake chamber, again, you know, I like cutting things out. You know, it's two portions to it. You got the service brake, you got the spring brake portion, two totally separate chambers in here. You'll see this little rod in here that moves in unison. Okay, if you pull that park brake out, for example, take air away from here, that means the spring's going to come out and it's going to work on the service portion to push that push rod, and your shoes stay against that park system, you know. So, you know, and again, one of those things you walk through. Adjustments, they're huge, you know, or, you know, all day long, you know, that's the heart of your brake system, and doing proper adjustment is important, you know. I mean, are you within range, you know? And you might have heard somebody talk about the 90 degrees. That's not really a requirement, but just so you know, when you step on the brake at 90 degrees, you have your ultimate forces over here, you know. So, and this, of course, is less than 90 degree, you know. So I get into all that. And for me to teach a brake course, to be honest with you, it's much easier. I separate everything. You know, let's talk about the supply system. What do you got? You got a compressor, governor, reservoirs, check valves, safety valves, indicators. And when I use my brake board, I actually walk through all that stuff, you know. Same thing, separate the service system from the park system, application valves. What do you got? Foot, hand, control valves, relay, service chambers, quick release valves, you know. And then, of course, you got the parking, merging, spring brakes, park controls. Because in reality, you guys work on these vehicles, I mean, you got miles and miles of lines. They're going all over the place, you know, what does what where, you know. And I'm going to do something real fast here, okay? Normally, typically, most of you guys that work on these vehicles, you're going to wind up with, what, an air leak here or there. You know, if the compressor keeps up with it, you're kind of okay, but it's You can hear it, you know, it's audible. You might see something out of hand. So it usually winds up being a line or self-evident. Maybe it's the diaphragm in my spring brake chamber or whatever, or the service diaphragm here. But the reason I do the brake courses is, what if something comes in all of a sudden and you have some kind of exotic problem? Because don't forget, you got QRC1 valves, you got two-way check valves, you got all sorts of stuff in there, one-way check valves. And then all of a sudden it's like, I think it's this, so you change a valve. That didn't do it. You change another valve, you change another valve, you change another valve. 10 valves later, you're older. Hey, I did a great job. It works the way it's meant to work. And most of this stuff on tractors and straight trucks, they're easy peasy. But if you ever get into these garbage containers, garbage trucks, you know, where you have so many other air components, you know, that's utilized in these type of trucks, and you get one of those schematics out, you can get into some serious problems, you know, transit buses too, all day long, you know. So again, that's why having a good knowledge of, you know, this is important, you know. So you know, and I do some stuff with this. I show issues and fatalities, but there's a perfect example here. You know, do you know where's your primary section? Where's your secondary section? Should you know? You better believe you should know. So this slide shows you, you know, valve gives modulated control service brakes, you know, and so on. Primary stays on top. Closest to pedal mechanically. Secondary, furthest section from pedal mechanically, somewhat. And in my classes, I actually walk through. I have people, you know, take the foot valves. I cut up hard. I want you to look at this, and this is all part of knowing that knowledge. What makes it a dual air brake system, you know? So, service relay valve to send modulated signal from foot valve service chambers, you know, works somewhat like a quick release. Difference is it has a supply line, which is not a quick release valve. Again, you know, there are differences. Are you comfortable? What's a differential pressure? What's a crack pressure? So those are things I walk through and all this stuff. Now, wow, we got this halfway decent early here, you know. This is the first time, guys. This is unless I have a clock way up there, you can't see it, okay? Then I look at it and it kind of gives me the timing. So we're a little bit early here. We did really, really good, you know. So Harley, I appreciate all the input as usual that you're giving me and everything. I mean, really, you know, Josh fire trucks are the same with multiple brands, manufacturers, you know, absolutely. At any given time, you know, in my area we have electric. By the way, we have I do a lot for our metro people. Every one of them has to come through my brake classes, but they got electric buses. And to be honest with you, you got all the controllers and everything else in there too. But guess what's at the wheel end again, right? You still have disc brakes. The only difference is the way you get air. You got a scroll compressor, electrically driven, and so on. But most of the basic stuff winds up being the same, you know. But yeah, you get into, you know, fire trucks the same with. And I'm trying to hang my head on them multiple brands. The problem is, just think about all the manufacturers you have out there, right? You got Bendix, you got Midland, you know, Wapco. You got your aftermarket that takes these things and rebuilds them and everything else, you know. You have different brands of vehicles out there, you know, your international freight liners. And at any given time, it's not a problem, but that particular manufacturer is more interested in meeting the requirements of 121 with their vehicles. Okay? And of course, you know, business-wise too, hey, I need 10,000 of these particular valves. Mr. Manufacturer, can you give me a little bit of a break? You know, oh yeah, we'll set you 5 cents cheaper and so on, you know. So, Rockwell Shoes, is it Kelsey? Yeah, it is, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I keep this on for a reason. Good observation. I keep this on for a reason because I have an electric ABS board that I built you know, most of the stuff I build myself. You know, I actually hooked up the computer and everything, and I go through it. That's one of the modules in the class, and you know, and not that you want to use a lap scope for that, but I'll pull my lap scope out just to show, because it's not a perfect ABS board, but you know, my little sensor and toner, they wobble a little, but that's what I want the guys to see. I want them to see. I can go on a board and draw a perfect sinusoidal waveform, you know, but the computer's looking for that kind of stuff. So I always kept this here, because years ago, you know, you had a sensor go in here, and believe it or not, when first generation, when they came out, it's like you'd have to, you know, adjust the sensor, and you know, whoever heard of, you know, adjust the sensor, and we didn't know squat about ABS when they first came out, so we kind of were our own worst enemies, you know. Just, guys, you have no idea. Today you take that sensor, shove it all the way in. There's more to it than that, but yeah, good observation, you know. Scott, how old are you? You know? Now I'm curious, you're an old timer like me? In the 80s, all right. Yeah. Technology is huge. When I was doing a lot of automotive training, I'll be very honest with you, you know, you had the old distributor and stuff, and you know, I figured really easy to explain once we went into distributorless. You know, you're still doing the same thing. You're trying to get spark, but once you make people understand that you're trying to get from here to here, who gives a shit how you do it, you know? So we went in, started out with transistors, and now we got sensors and everything. You still have to have all the timing, but once you understand how it works, you know, so good for you, Scott. So you're still staying in this business. Nice, you know. So hopefully you never got hurt. Your body is okay, you know, 61. Woo! Good for you. So, but we got about 2-3 minutes left. So, guys, again, you had that, I'm going to click that on over here. So if you could, I would like to get out of the New York State area a little bit more. So Dorman is definitely going to start pushing these things. You know, we're going to be willing to travel a little bit. Because again, you know, with me personally, hope you took a snapshot of that. But with me personally, I'll be honest with you, I kind of enjoy doing the lunch and learns, but I got to tell you, I love sitting in a classroom and, you know, no holds barred. You know, no matter what I say, I don't have to worry about somebody, you know, gee, you said this, you said that, you know, HR department's going to get on your ass, which I really don't care at my age either, speaking of 61, you know. So, but guys, thank you. We're going to call it, because I know you guys are very anxious to get back to work. You want to bust your hands, you want to get dirty and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully someday I'll run across all of you guys live, you know, so that would really make my day, you know. So all of you. Good comments too, by the way. Thank you so much. That the comments actually keep me going, to tell you the truth, you know. So, you know, very good. Dave, Gino and I communicate all the time anyway, so he's from my region. He's, speaking of automotive, he really is great at automotive stuff. You know, he does diagnostics on the side. Years ago when I did automotive stuff, you know, he came through every one of my classes, you know, and that's how we kind of hooked up and we stayed as friends, you know. So, you know, sweet, this was an excellent, perfect air brake primer course. Take care of yourself. Enjoy. You know, I can't wait, Harley. Can't wait to get up to Algonquin, you know. She's here too, you know. Hold on a second. One real fast. Come here. You know. No, just for a second here. We're all family here. Turn around, okay? And Harley says hello over there, just so you know, okay? He's right across the border. You know, he'll buy you coffee someday from Tim's, you know. Very, very good. So Doreen, whenever you wanna, you know, I'm gonna stop recording, but you can keep this on. I'm gonna stop recording.